Do you have an extra room? I'm moving in, so you'll need to leave. My sister-in-law and mother-in-law showed up at my new house suddenly. They looked around without even stopping to honor my mother's plaque. Then they demanded that I leave. My husband Jason acted like he didn't care, just lounging on the sofa with our cat. I felt like it was the end, but I decided to calmly say okay and sell the house. I hadn't even lived there much. My name is Madison, and I'm a 30-year-old office worker. I grew up with just my mom, who struggled financially. I worked hard to get scholarships to help her out. She always wanted me to go to college, probably because she didn't have a degree herself. So, I studied a lot while others were out having fun. I got into a top university and landed a job at a big company right after graduating. When I got my first paycheck, my mom and I celebrated by treating ourselves to sushi in Beverly Hills. But when we were at the fancy restaurant, we were both so nervous that we couldn't enjoy the food. I worried about fitting in at a glamorous company because I'd always focused on my studies. But my colleagues were really nice and I managed to do okay. Even though I had a good salary, my mom and I still stuck to our frugal habits. She kept working part-time, and we lived in our small apartment. Our only splurge was going out for nice meals once in a while. Every time we did, my mom would thank me for being such a wonderful daughter who could treat her to meals like that. It made me feel proud, like all my hard work was worth it. But 4 years into my career, my mom's health started to decline. We went on a spa trip hoping it would help, but she didn't get better. She kept going through ups and downs, and I worried constantly about what I would do without her. That's when I met Jason. He was 2 years younger and a smooth talker. At 27, I'd never had a boyfriend because I was always busy with studying and afraid of being judged. Jason effortlessly became a part of my life. We both didn't have dads and loved cats, so we bonded over that. Eventually, he suggested we go to a cafe, and I agreed, feeling excited. He texted me later saying he wanted to ask sooner but was afraid of rejection. I was thrilled, not realizing then that it might have been a line he used before. But I believed he truly cared for me. And as our relationship progressed, something miraculous happened. My mom began to regain her spirits. Seeing me dress up and go out made her smile. She'd say, "I'll take care of the house, you go and have a good time," almost as if she were going on the date herself. I always thought sacrificing my happiness was the way to repay her, but I realized that my happiness made her happy too, just as her happiness was mine. As Jason and I got closer, my mom's health improved, and she spent less time in bed. When I told Jason about a conversation with my mom, he proposed. He said, "Hey, why don't we just get married? That way your mom can rest a little easier." Even though it was only 6 months into our relationship, I was completely smitten with Jason. His sister and mother were hairstylists who ran a salon together, and since they planned to live together in the future, he assured me that it wouldn't be a problem for him to live with my mother. When I introduced Jason to my mother, she was moved to tears and grasped both his hands, saying, "Please take good care of Madison." Jason firmly held her hands in return and declared, while looking into my mother's eyes, "I'm honored, ma'am. I might be younger and not very reliable, but I promise to make Madison happy." At that moment, I was so overjoyed I almost cried. But looking back now, I realized he was nothing but a terrible jerk. I would later come to understand how little experience I had with the opposite sex, or rather, how little I knew about the world. Following his declaration, Jason moved in with us, bringing along a slightly large suitcase. He suggested it would be best to start living together in the house my mother was accustomed to. We welcomed Jason into our small apartment, and while my mother enthusiastically explained how everything worked, he barely listened. He said, "Don't mind me. I doubt I'll be here much." I knew he was often out drinking for work and busy with client golf or surfing on Sundays, so I thought that was what he was referring to. But the reality was different. He truly never came home. On the rare occasions he did, he would just take a bath, sleep, and upon waking up, ask me, "Hey, can you give me some money for food?" At first, I didn't understand and asked him honestly, why don't you just eat here? Besides, what about your share of the living expenses? Jason had not been contributing financially to the household, and my mother and I were living just as we had before. He then laughed with a puzzled look on his face. Living expenses? Why should I when I'm hardly ever here? I almost agreed with him for a second, but then I snapped out of it and confronted him. Wait a minute, we're married, right? That means we're supposed to share our lives together. So you want me to come home every day? No, I get that you're busy and maybe staying at friends' places, but I'd like to get a message from you when that's the case. While we were dating, Jason was very attentive, always letting me know if he was going to be late for a date, and he never broke a promise. But after we got married, he stopped reading my texts, and days would go by without a reply. When I brought this up, Jason suddenly turned ice cold and said, "Didn't think you were the kind of woman to say stuff like that," and turned away. His cold expression was something I had never seen before, and it chilled me to the bone. So I blurted out, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to be possessive. And he instantly softened, I know, but come on, we're married, right? Don't you trust me? He asked, tilting his head. I shook my head vigorously. No, that's not it. I do trust you, I said, almost in tears, and he looked into my eyes and whispered, Thank you, then quickly added, So about $600 will do, okay? Fearing he might leave me, I gave in and handed over the money. In hindsight, that was the beginning of a nightmare. To avoid worrying my mother, I couldn't confide in her and explained that Jason was just on a lot of business trips. Alone with my thoughts, I continued this strange marriage where I would give money to Jason whenever he occasionally came home. When I finally couldn't stand it anymore and confronted him, he simply wrote his name on a divorce paper and handed it to me, saying, If you get sick of this, you can leave me at any time. It's strange how humans work. Being given such an option made it impossible for me to leave. Jason had clearly read my mind. My mom noticed something was off with me, but she never tried to address it. As half a year passed, for some reason, my mother-in-law and sister-in-law started coming over to our place more often. Even though they supposedly ran a beauty salon, they'd show up on weekdays or weekends without even bringing a small gift, sit in Jason's room while he was out, and say, Don't mind us, just some tea and snacks will do. And they'd stay for hours, sometimes even joining us for lunch or dinner. When I eavesdropped on their conversations, they were mostly bad-mouthing others, creating a really unpleasant atmosphere. One day, loud enough for me to hear, my sister-in-law said, Wow, can't believe he married such a plain Jane. Her fashion sense is so drab. And with reckless abandon, my mother-in-law added, Well, if she were attractive, she'd probably cheat on you. And they laughed heartily together. They didn't specify who, but I knew they were talking about me. When I was reeling from the shock and covering my ears, I heard the damning words, Well, she's pretty much a good cash cow, isn't she? And with only her mom around, said my sister-in-law, and my mother-in-law chimed in with a worldly tone. Seems easy enough to get money out of her. Plus, we get to do whatever we want. And they cackled again. I wanted to storm out of the room and tell them to leave, but I couldn't bring myself to do it. Since that day, I've been feeling really down. Jason, as usual, didn't come home and didn't even read my messages. During this time, I failed to notice my mom's health deteriorating again. Then, one day at work, I got a call that my mom had been rushed to the hospital by ambulance. When I got there, I found out she had fallen down the stairs of our apartment complex, severely injuring her back. The doctor said that given her age, she'd likely have to use a wheelchair from now on. From what I was told, Mom had been feeling under the weather for quite some time, experiencing frequent bouts of dizziness. It seems that dizziness was the culprit behind her fall down the stairs. My mom kept apologizing, saying, I'm so sorry, Madison. I'm really sorry. Over and over. My mom kept apologizing, and I just shook my head, crying. I was determined to break through this tough situation. Given that my mom's hospital stay would be quite long, including rehabilitation, I decided to look for a wheelchair-accessible home. Fortunately, we had lived frugally, so there was a decent amount of savings. My mom always loved looking at home ads in the newspapers, often saying how much she'd like to live in such houses. I held on to the hope that buying the home she dreamt of might bring her spirit back. When I asked Jason for his opinion, he casually said, "Why not? I'd like my own room. Oh yeah, let's get a cat too." Seeing Jason's happy face for the first time in a long while made me foolishly happy. So, I enthusiastically started house hunting. Luckily, I found the perfect spec house right in our neighborhood. It was completely wheelchair accessible. I felt it was destiny and made an immediate purchase. I could afford a down payment of around $360,000, and thanks to being employed by a top-notch company, the mortgage was easily approved. Of course, Jason didn't contribute a dime, but that had become the norm. He only visited my mom once at the hospital. By the way, my mother-in-law and sister-in-law, despite their frequent visits to our house, never came to see her. I hurried to finalize the house deal before my mom was discharged and managed to move us. Imperfectly, it was honestly exhausting to balance work and moving, but thinking of my mom and Jason's happy faces, I pushed through. When my mom came to the new house in her wheelchair, her eyes sparkled as she looked around our model home-like place and exclaimed like a child, "I can't believe I get to live in a house like this. It feels like a dream." Jason, too, seemed to like his new room as he started coming home more often. Then, we went to the pet store together and brought home 2 adorable cats. Both Jason and my mom doted on the cats, and our home was filled with lively energy. Just as I was starting to think everything might turn out okay, tragedy struck again. 2 months after moving in, one morning, my mom didn't wake up. I found it strange and went to check on her, only to discover she had passed away cold. I called an ambulance, but it was too late. She had suffered a heart attack. With the new house and everything else, life seemed so pointless now. I was overwhelmed by despair and hardly remember the funeral proceedings. Jason acted the part of the dutiful, gentle husband at the funeral. But as soon as we got home, he'd do nothing. But he just flopped on the couch and said, "Man, I'm beat," tossing the TV remote carelessly on a shelf. Then he asked me, "When's dinner?" As I sat holding my mother's memorial plaque and played with the cat. Seeing this, I finally snapped back to reality. I'd realized a long time ago that my marriage was a mistake, but I'd been pretending everything was fine so as not to worry my mother. I also didn't want to admit my failure to myself. But can I really call him my husband if he doesn't even comfort me as I mourn my beloved mother? As I was staring at my so-called husband, dumbfounded, the doorbell rang. When I went to answer it, my sister-in-law and mother-in-law, still dressed in their mourning clothes, barged in, saying, "Wow, this place is huge. Why didn't you tell us about it?" You see, neither my mother nor I had given my mother-in-law our new address. I assumed Jason would tell them, but it seemed he hadn't bothered, perhaps out of disinterest. As they walked around the house, eyeing everything greedily, they smirked at each other and said, "You've got spare rooms, right? We'll live here. You can leave." It seemed they were under the impression Jason bought the house. Jason, meanwhile, continued to relax on the couch with the cat, seemingly oblivious to everything. Looking up to the heavens, I thought it was all over. And then my mother-in-law, still hiked up, said, "The apartment we're living in now is so noisy. The landlord comes every day just because we're a bit behind on the rent." That's when I realized their frequent visits were to escape from their landlord. My sister-in-law grinned and said, "I'll take the upstairs south room." Madison always had a knack for choosing the good spots, didn't she? They saw my mother's death as an opportunity to shamelessly move themselves into my home. Naturally, I thought, I'll send these people packing to hell. Fine, I'll leave. Take care then. As soon as I agreed, they nearly jumped for joy and said to Jason, "Jason, we can live together again. You really can't manage without us, can you?" Jason, perhaps too tired to care, lazily laughed and said, Yeah, I'm off to bed," and retreated to his room. With spring in their step, my sister-in-law and mother-in-law told me, "We'll be moving in on Tuesday in 2 weeks, so make sure you're out by then," and left. "Next week, huh?" I murmured, carefully placing my mother's memorial plaque, portrait, and ashes on the shelf, and whispered to her picture, "Watch over me, Mom," as if she was smiling back at me, saying, "Give them hell." I promptly filled out the divorce papers I prepared earlier and rushed them to the courthouse, then started plotting my revenge. Come Monday, I was sitting at a cafe terrace with a view of the new house, hat pulled down over my eyes waiting. There was a for sale sign by the new house's doorplate. The autumn sky was clear, and as I was leisurely reading a book, a moving truck pulled up in front of the house, and out stepped Jason, my sister-in-law and mother-in-law. I knew that Jason had been helping them move over the weekend. I had demurely asked him, "Please don't come back until the moving day. If I see you, I might get sentimental." They were perplexed by the for sale sign. The for sale sign caught everyone's attention, but Jason nonchalantly suggested it might be a prank and tried to open the door with his key, which of course didn't fit. I had changed the locks. Jason was frantically rattling the keys, and both my sister-in-law and mother-in-law looked on with anxious expressions. Frantically, he fiddled with the key as the movers looked on, ready to start. "What's the meaning of this?" my sister-in-law and mother-in-law demanded, irritation rising in their voices. Jason, still seemingly unfazed, said, "I'll just make a call." And that's when my phone vibrated. I ignored it, and as he couldn't get through to me, panic began to set in on his face. The two women looked on anxiously as they and Jason received frosty stares from the movers. Finally, he called someone else, the real estate agency listed on the sign. And there I was, sipping my coffee. "Hello, I'm calling about a property in." "Yes, yes, yes, it's being sold without my consent. Could you come over here, please?" Jason began to explain on the phone when he was interrupted. "It's already being sold by the owner." "No, that can't be right. You want to sell it if I want to buy it?" "What are you talking about?" Please hold on." And he hung up the phone. Then my sister-in-law and mother-in-law, with faces like furious demons, stormed up to Jason and demanded, "Hold on a minute. Isn't this the house you bought?" "No. I mean, it's not that I bought it. But isn't it considered joint property if you're married? Madison can't just sell it without consent," he retorted with surprising confidence. So I stepped in to deal with it myself. Surprised, my sister-in-law and mother-in-law turned to me and nearly snapped. "What have you done with this house?" I responded with a sleep voice, "What have I done? I sold it. It's my property after all. Feel free to buy it if you want." "Oh, I thought living here meant that kind of arrangement," playing dumb. Jason turned pale and started, "Hey, you can't just do whatever you." To which I shot back, "What are you talking about? You haven't contributed a dime. And to talk about joint property when you haven't even contributed to living expenses since we got married? How dare you?" For the first time in my life, I was yelling at someone out of anger. Jason was taken aback by the sudden resistance from a woman who used to be compliant to him. I continued to press Jason. "You better give me back all the money I've given you. I'm ready with a lawyer," and shoved a business card and a claim for alimony in his face. I've always kept a household account book, so I had carefully calculated all the money I'd given to Jason. Though it was only a year and a half of marriage, the money I had handed over amounted to nearly $20,000. When Jason floundered, saying, "That was supposed to be for our living expenses, wasn't it?" "You can't just claim that." My sister-in-law and mother-in-law also chimed in. "Exactly. What are you even saying? A housewife receiving living expenses is a given. Claiming that back is terrifying for an elite woman," to which I shouted back, "Shut up. Don't meddle in someone else's business. And you too? Have some nerve." It felt like something inside me had exploded. Both my sister-in-law and mother-in-law seemed overwhelmed by my outburst and began to tremble, holding each other. There was no way I was going to lose to these women who were always bad-mouthing others behind their backs. Jason started to back away, looking like he might run off at any moment. He was the type of man who'd run when things got tough. No use in running. I said firmly, I'm going to make sure you settle this properly. It seemed my resolve had an impact. Jason, too, collapsed just like my sister-in-law and mother-in-law, looking completely lost. The movers, looking troubled, said, where should we move the items to? I replied, though it felt cruel, I don't know, ask them, wondering where to move to when they don't even have a house, and I just smiled sweetly. What happened to them after they lost their place to go? I don't know. They probably rented a new apartment through some contacts of Jason. Jason had quit his job at a company soon after marrying me. He was scouted for a nightclub because of his playboy skills. Every night, he used the money for me like water. And while it seemed to go well at first, by the time I built our new house, he was scraping by. My sister-in-law and mother-in-law, unaware of such things, had come to depend on Jason's supposed financial strength based on the new house he had built and moved in as soon as my mother passed away. They used to say, "The beauty salon business is going well lately. We can support you so you don't have to worry about anything." But in reality, the beauty salon managed by my mother-in-law had long since gone under. Swamped with debt and lacking real skill as hairdressers, they couldn't hold down jobs at any salon they went to. They had both been planning to rely on each other and ended up failing. Eventually, Jason got into trouble with some shady characters and disappeared. It was a fitting end for such a deadbeat man. My sister-in-law and mother-in-law are also missing, and I can't help but think they haven't exactly had the best lives. I couldn't get alimony from Jason, but I've come to see it as the cost of a life lesson. After the divorce, people have said I seem different, and somehow I've entered what you'd call my prime time for attracting others. It seems I used to be seen as serious and quiet, but now there's a certain settled confidence about me that has become attractive. I had been quite put off by the idea of marriage for a while, but as I started dining out with men more often, whenever the mood seemed to set right for something more, I excused myself to go home because of my cats. Their reaction in such moments is quite telling of their character, so it's been a good strategy for sizing up men. In reality, I live in a pet-friendly apartment with my 2 cats. The other day, as I was sorting through my mother's belongings, I found a letter addressed to me. It was dated the month before she passed, right around when I'd settled into my new place. The letter was filled with various memories from my childhood through to my professional life, and it ended with her usual phrase, "To live in such a nice home, to lead such a good life. I've been blessed with a wonderful daughter. Thank you so much." I hugged that letter from my mother tightly and cried my eyes out for a while. Buying that new place definitely wasn't a waste. I've come to realize, from here on out, I'm committed to living positively and earnestly, keeping my mother's words close to my heart, and hoping to make someone feel as rewarded by me as I felt by her.